Deep dives and blue skies. Welcome back to Talking Blue with Nick, the best Dodgers analytical podcast that you can find. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Talking Blue, the best Dodgers analytical podcast that you can find. I'm your host, Nick. Today you are listening to episode 77 of Talking Blue. It is a second edition of off-season talk here on Talking Blue. Today we have some exciting things to talk about. Something actually happened in the off-season, as we are about 2 weeks away, a little less than, from Christmas, which is usually a big time in the off-season. The winter meetings just passed. Today we are here to talk about the newest acquisition of the Dodgers, newest closer, Edwin Diaz. Yes, Edwin Diaz signed a 3-year, $69 million deal with the Dodgers. Happened a few days ago at the winter meetings. So I'm going to talk about all that stuff as well as a couple of rumors. So it won't be too long of a pod, but we're going to just talk about a bunch of little scenarios, obviously mostly headlined around Edwin Diaz. So, as always, you can get this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of the new videos dropping. You can follow us on all social media at Talkin' Blue Pod, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram, X, all that stuff. You can follow myself at Talking Blue Nick. I usually tweet a lot about the Dodgers. Haven't done a lot of tweeting throughout the offseason. I just kind of like to let the offseason play out a bit. But of course, here on this podcast, on my X, I talk all about the Dodgers. Report them, predictions, all that stuff. If you guys watched my last podcast, which was a few weeks ago, I talked about, like a little bit of a Dodgers preview, offseason preview, and players to expect for them to be rumored in on, and then also who made the most sense. Some of those guys still seem to be in play. One of those guys obviously happened with Edwin Diaz. And then lastly, you can follow us on Reddit at competitive-week8715. I know it's a weird name and it's a little complicated, but if you know Reddit, you can't really change your name once they give it to you. I was not aware of that back in the day, back earlier this March when I made that account. So that's the name. There's Talking Blue stuff all over there, so all over the account, so you can't miss it. It's all Dodger stuff. Competitive-week8715. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Of course, the biggest news and the, basically the whole point of this pod today is Edwin Diaz. So a little bit of some cool stuff to share with you guys. Edwin Diaz actually signed at the winter meetings. Winter meetings took place earlier this week. At the time of this recording, it's now Sunday, so the winter meetings was earlier in the week. Technically, it started last Sunday, but really the winter meetings is like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's usually when it goes on. I was actually at the winter meetings, believe it or not. The winter meetings was in Orlando, Florida this year. That is not too far from where I live. So I made the drive up to Orlando to check it out. For those of you, if you've never been to the winter meetings, it is actually a really interesting thing to go to. That was my first time going. And it kind of was all that I expected, to be honest. I know the winter meetings is all about, obviously, the GMs and teams, managers, everyone goes to the winter meetings, and there is a lot of things that get talked about, trade rumors. Usually there are some free agents that sign. Obviously there's a ton of reporters, agents. It's just one of those fun times in the offseason to look forward to, especially in baseball where we know it's kind of a slow burn. So I was interested to see what would go on. Some cool people to see. And by the way, I don't know if this is how it always is at all winter meetings, because if you're not aware, the winter meetings location changes every year. It's usually in a warm location, like I said, Orlando this year, but sometimes it's in Nashville. It's a lot of time it's in California, like San Diego. I believe it was in Dallas, Texas last year, so it's kind of always in places like that. But the last few years, the winter meetings has been a little bit all over the place because in 2020, there was no winter meetings because of COVID. And then in 2021, if you guys remember, there was a lockout. Major League Baseball, the 2022 season technically started like a tad bit late. But if you remember, spring training, there was a late ramp up to the season, and it ended up we didn't end up having games canceled. But basically, when you have the collective bargaining agreement and players association all that stuff, all the rules of baseball that get bargained, and a deal that gets accepted lasts a certain amount of years, and it always expires December 1st. So when the winter meetings takes place like a week and a half after December 1st, when there's a lockout, it gets canceled. So 2021, the winter meetings was canceled. So 2023, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I know that was all a little bit confusing. But anyways, the winter meetings is a little bit all over the place the last few years. So it was something I was looking forward to going. And by the way, like I said, if you're not aware, it's actually free to go there. Now, I don't know if that's the same every location every year. I don't know if there's like more security, but I was able to go there, dress nice, and walk around the hotel. The winter meetings is always in a big fancy hotel, and you're just allowed to walk around the lobbies, and you are literally walking around the baseball universe, because you walk around hundreds of reporters, agents, front office people, general managers, scouts, as well as former players. So, I literally got to see Albert Pujols, Carlos Beltran. Who else did I get to see? Kevin Kiermaier. There's a lot of, the winter meetings, like I said, is mainly around trade talks and free agents and stuff, but there is also a lot of job opportunities that go on there. So that's why there's a lot of people who show up there looking for jobs. I saw just a ton of random people. Dusty Baker, someone that was there. So I also saw Buster Posey. So it's a pretty cool experience. And the day that I was there, while I was there in the lobbies, the news of the Edwin Diaz signing actually broke. So I actually have a friend that I used to work with who is involved in podcasting and media, YouTube, stuff like that. He has a sports baseball channel, and he's actually a Mets fan. And I was walking in the lobby. I'd seen him previously, and I saw him again and was walking towards him, and he said to me, don't say it. Don't rub it in my face. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you didn't hear the news? Edwin Diaz just signed with the Dodgers. So that was pretty sick. I was hoping while I would be there, some news would break. And I was literally in one of the hallways around a bunch of people when that news broke. About 20 minutes before that, the news about Kyle Schwarber, he re-signed with the Phillies, broke. So since then, anyways, long story short, Edwin Diaz goes to the Dodgers. A lot more free agents have signed since then. Not all the big ones, and there hasn't been a crazy amount of movement, but the offseason has definitely got underway. So let's get into the Edwin Diaz signing. Like I said, it is 3 years, $69 million. So if you guys remember my previous podcast, like I said, I talked about players that were good matchups, a good match for the Dodgers, some relievers and some outfielders. I had Edwin Diaz on there on my free agent list. I believe I had him as third most likely. I had two other guys above him that I thought were more likely. And if you guys remember my rationale, it was basically he was going to go to the Dodgers or go to the Mets. They obviously needed relief help. The Dodgers can afford him. But my biggest reason as to why I thought it would not happen was actually because the Dodgers just signed a big closer the year before. Now, Tanner Scott has not had the track record of Edwin Diaz, no doubt. But they did just sign him to a big deal. Relief pitching is the most volatile position, meaning that it is the most up and down, inconsistent. There are literally relievers every season who are dominant. Following year, they drop off. The year after that, they're dominant again. It happens all the time. So I just thought ultimately with the money that Diaz was going to command, that the Dodgers, wouldn't be in on him. Plus, I thought the Mets would be more in on him. But yeah, so that's how it played out. Actually, if you guys remember, the guy that I had one spot above Diaz as more likely was Devin Williams. My number one spot was Pete Fairbanks. We'll get into that a little later. But Devin Williams ended up signing with the Mets. It actually, I think, was a few days after that podcast came out. So it was it definitely increased the odds of Diaz to the Dodgers. But again, I still thought, the Mets would pony up inside Edwin Diaz. They're kind of having a weird offseason, letting guys walk, a couple of weird trades, weird signings. So a lot of Mets fans are upset about that. But hey, Edwin Diaz, I kind of said to you guys another reason that I thought it was possible, because if you're Edwin Diaz, and this isn't like a shot at the Mets, because I think that they are, a team that is they will be headed in the right direction. David Stearns, actually their new general manager, was another guy that I saw at the winter meetings just walking right next to him, which was cool. But he's getting a lot of flack for a lot of the moves he has made / hasn't made, like letting Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz walk. But I thought that a reason the Diaz signing was possible was because the Mets are a little bit of an organization. They have a little bit of a lot of drama that surrounds them, because they live in, because they play in New York, where there is the most media, crazed town. And but they're not the Yankees. They are not on that level. They don't have the pedigree and the history that the Yankees have. But they do have the same amount of media coverage and crazy fans. So it's almost like they have the same expectations as the Yankees do, without the history to back that up. And they just seem to always have a lot of drama around them, like with coaches and players, and little feuds between players and all that stuff. And I just thought, like, Edwin Diaz opted out. And if you're Edwin Diaz, if the money was equal and you had a chance to go to the Mets or the Dodgers, and you're still going to be the closer of the team, like I said, most players aren't going to take a pay cut. So obviously, if the Mets would have offered more money, then he would have resigned there. But I just thought, if the money was equal, like, why would you not pick the Dodgers over the Mets? Like, a team that not only have they won the last 2 World Series, and they're extremely, they're poised to go back to another World Series, and they're going to try to win another one. But they're an organization that doesn't ever really have much drama. They're always talked about how well they treat their players and their scouting and how they can make you better. It just seems like, again, no shade at the Mets, but just like, if you're Edwin Diaz, like, why wouldn't you, if the money is equal, why wouldn't you pick the Dodgers? So, there's also been reports that have came out that, he didn't really seem as interested, like I said, to go back to the Mets, and it wasn't really like a flop job by the Mets to bring him back, as much as it was just Diaz wanted to go to the Dodgers. And that's where the Dodgers are at, that they've been so successful that they're going to, they don't have to woo free agents as much as other teams would. I mean, what's there to sell? Come play on the best team in the league, where you're going to get your money. They might defer it a little bit, but you're going to get your money. It's a great place to live. It's not like they have to sell you on the area. It's Southern California, where it never rains and it's 75 and sunny. You're going to play with the greatest player ever in Shohei Ohtani. And like, what's there to sell? So, especially again when the money's going to be there, it's not like a low market team, a team that doesn't have a lot of money to spend on free agents that just happens to be in a nice area or anything like that. Like, there's really not much to sell. It's like, hey, we think you fit in. Why not come play for us? So, Edwin Diaz, let's talk a little bit about him. So, obviously, if you don't know much about Edwin Diaz, he's a 31-year-old relief pitcher, closer from Puerto Rico. As consistent as closers come, if I'm being honest. It's just funny because not so long ago, I guess at this point it is a little bit of times ago, but not too long ago, when he actually debuted with the Mets, traded over from the Mariners, he actually had a really rough first season with the Mets. But ever since then, if you look into his numbers, which is obviously like 6 years ago at this point, in 2020, the shortened season, he threw 25 innings pitched, a 1.75 ERA. I mean, that's pretty gnarly. Just so you know, K per 9 for relievers. Anything over 10 is pretty nasty, like especially 12, 13, like that's pretty common. 17 strikeouts per 9. 2021, 62 innings pitched that year, a 3.45 ERA. 2022, this was the best season of his career. 62 innings pitched, a 1.31 ERA with a 17.1 strikeouts per 9. So he basically did what he did that year in 2020. He did that in 2022 over a full season. 2023, he did not play, if you guys remember, in the WBC when he was playing for Puerto Rico. He actually broke his leg celebrating a victory. Like, literally got the final out on the mound. His teammates came to celebrate, got tripped up. Like, sometimes I guess that happens. stepped on whatever fell down and broke his leg and literally did not play the entire 2023 season. But he's come back the last 2 years, 2024, 2025, a 3.52 ERA in 2024 with a 14.1 strikeouts per nine. Again, really nasty stuff. The ERA was up there a little bit, and his ERA plus actually was not great that year. Again, by his elite standards. But then 2025, this past year, 66 innings pitched. Again, 13.3 strikeouts per nine. His ERA was one of the lower. His ERA, was the second lowest in all of Major League Baseball for relief pitchers, behind Aroldis Chapman. So, one of the awards they give out to closers is the Trevor Hoffman Award. I believe he's won that 3 times. So basically, after all that and all those numbers, and I have a little bit of more numbers to get into, but Dodgers pretty much just signed the best closer in the game. Like I said, the position closer / relief pitcher is always up and down, but of those very consistent guys like Mason Miller at this point in his young career, Josh Hader, Aroldis Chapman had a bounce back year. Edwin Diaz is pretty much up there. I mean, some people might take Mason Miller because he's younger and because of how electric he is. He's got the most electric stuff in the game, literally. But of those kind of guys, Andres Munoz, another guy for the Mariners who's pretty good and pretty consistent. Johan Duran of the Phillies. Edwin Diaz is without question a top 5 reliever, top 5 closer in the game. And again, he's probably 2 or 3 if you had to really make rankings. So he's just elite. He will slot right into the closer's spot. Again, we'll get into a little bit in a sec about the makeup of the bullpen. But some more numbers on what just makes Diaz and just the proof of why he's been so good for a while now. 2022 to 2025, 3 seasons, obviously, because he didn't pitch in 2023. But he has the highest K per 9 among all relief pitchers, and he has the highest K percentage, the highest strikeout percentage. K per 9 over 14, so he's striking out over 14 batters per 9 innings. A strikeout percentage of 42.3%, so he strikes out just under 50% of the hitters he faces, which is just gnarly. And then a little bit of what it makes him really good. So if you've never watched Edwin Diaz pitch, he's actually not a big guy. 6'3", that's decent. He's just not a major guy, considering how hard he throws. He's not a massive guy. Interesting arm slot too. That's a little bit of what makes him difficult. He kind of has that 3/4, kind of low arm slot, which a lot of pitchers nowadays that are really effective with that. Fastball slider guy, 2-pitch guy, 4-seam fastball slider. And some of the stuff I dug into, which is kind of interesting, I always thought of Edwin Diaz. When you think of Edwin Diaz, you always think of that slider, electric slider. But what actually was his best pitch this year, and one of the best pitches in the game, was his fastball. So in 2025, his 4-seam fastball had the lowest batting average against in the sport. Number 1 of all pitchers, all relievers. Obviously, if you up to the innings pitched requirement to just starters, he would fall out. But of all pitchers in Major League Baseball in 2025, batting average against, a 133 batting average against, that was number 1 in the sport. So he had the number 1 fastball in the game and the highest whiff percentage on a fastball, 39.4%. So basically 40% whiff rate on that 4-seam fastball, number 1 in the game. So by a couple metrics, he had the best fastball in the game last year. Again, not his slider, which is kind of interesting. His slider was still elite, though. It had the 8th highest whiff percentage of all sliders in the game at 44%. And the slider numbers, again, were also pretty ridiculous. In 2025, opponents hit 157 against his slider. So he only throws 2 pitches, but they are 2 of the best pitches in the game. He also has electric stuff. The 4-seam fastball averages 97.2 miles an hour. If you watch Edwin Diaz pitch, he pretty much hits 96 to 99. You'll see him hit 100 occasionally. The one bugaboo about him, like most closers and relievers, is he will allow walks. An 8.1 walk percentage, which again, when you don't give up hits, you strike everybody out. You don't give up hard contact. I mean, Edwin Diaz also had a high ground ball percentage, 77 percentile in ground ball percentage, 48.1%. So he's not giving up a ton of fly balls. He is striking out literally 99th percentile in whiff percentage and strikeout percentage. So when it literally comes to striking hitters out, getting swings and misses, all that stuff, chase percentage, like Edwin Diaz is of the very best in the game. Even extension, 96th percentile in extension. So again, he gets on top of hitters. He really reaches out from the mound and shortens the distance. Expected ERA, expected batting average. So that's like the quality of contact. 99th percentile. So he's not getting hit hard. He's not getting unlucky or anything like that. He just straight up dominates. Again, the 2 pitches are elite. So just a really fun pitcher. So those are all the numbers that make him pretty much one of the 3 best closers in the game. Obviously, the Mets stuff, I already talked about how it looked like it was going to be either the Dodgers or the Mets, and it was a little surprising that it actually happened. But, like I said, when you kind of lay out all that stuff, all those little opportunities, like maybe it wasn't. It shouldn't have been that surprising. Some of the reports as well, if you guys remember his brother, Alexis Diaz, who mostly in his career pitched with the Reds and made his mark in Cincinnati, but fell off the last couple of years. He was actually on the Dodgers this past year. Came up, I believe it was in like June or July that he came up, but was back and forth between the minor leagues a couple times. And then it was actually in August when the Dodgers, I think it was when they swept the Padres, when they were in that crazy up and down period of like getting swept, sweeping the Padres. He actually had a big save, I think, or I think he came into the 9th but didn't finish the inning. But anyways, Alexis Diaz had his share of time in the Dodgers organization, and it was reported that he influenced his brother Edwin Diaz a little bit, kind of told them, the Dodgers are for real, the way they treat their players and the family and all that stuff is worth it. So shout out to Alexis Diaz, because it sounds like he gave a little recruiting pitch to the Dodgers. I'm not even sure. I should look it up. Is Alexis Diaz like under contract with the Dodgers anymore? Is he like a free agent? I don't even know how that works, but let's do a quick Google search. He is a free agent, so Alexis Diaz is no longer with the Dodgers. So shout out to him. He didn't even have to do all that stuff, and he still helped out the Dodgers even though he's not on there. The number that Edwin Diaz chose is number 3. That's pretty cool. He previously worn, it was either 38 or 39. I think 39, but that number is retired by Roy Campanella, the Dodger great catcher. So he wears number 3. Kind of interesting because most pitchers, if you actually think about it, most pitchers don't wear single-digit numbers. One of the only guys that comes to mind is like Marcus Stroman, I think, used to wear number 6, I think. Julio Urias, who used to be on the Dodgers, wore number 6 or 7. But most pitchers do not wear single-digit numbers. It's kind of a rare thing. So that's cool. He gets to wear number 3. Chris Taylor's worn number. That's actually my favorite number when I played baseball and stuff. I usually wore number 3, so just another reason to like him. So super cool guy. He's obviously from Puerto Rico, so he has ties with Kike Hernandez. He also said in his press conference that he spoke to Kike Hernandez about the Dodgers and their organization. One of the other cool things about Edwin Diaz, nowadays you see, he didn't necessarily start this, but it's become a big trend the last few years in Major League Baseball, is closers having like that really cool entrance. If you've seen, usually like with cool music and like the lights in the stadium turning off and flashing and all that stuff. Johan Duran of the Phillies has a pretty sick one, something with like a spider, it must be his nickname or something, and like cool music. Robert Suarez, who actually just signed with the Braves, but Padres closer, he had a pretty cool one as well, cool like Latin song. A couple other guys have some cool stuff like that. Edwin Diaz is like someone who kind of started that in this generation. That has happened before in like past years, but obviously that Timmy Trumpet song with the like the just electric like trumpets, and it's like a kind of like a EDM club song, but he used it as his like closer entrance, and the Mets would like turn out all the lights, and the stadium was rocking, and became like a cool just became like a cool thing to see on TV and if you're in the stadium. And he's like a electric guy. He was even talking about in his press conference how he's like a cool, calm, collective guy. But if you watch him on the mound, he does show personality. He is like an intense kind of guy. So the Dodgers, the last thing I'll talk about with Edwin Diaz is like how he fits into the bullpen. Obviously, he fits in as the closer. He will not be, like a 8th inning, 7th inning guy. It'll be the closer. He'll be the closer. He'll be the 9th inning guy. One interesting part of it from the Dodgers' point of view is I don't even remember the last time, probably like Kenley Jansen, the last time they had like a designated closer. And even in Kenley Jansen's final years, he wasn't always the designated closer. The Dodgers have always like kind of loved to have like the bullpen by committee. Like they kind of use the high leverage guys, Trinan, Vesia, Evan Phillips, obviously like a year ago in 2024, Michael Kopech was a part of that. They've had other guys that they've acquired, like Chris Martin was a random guy they had one year, or like Yency Almonte. Like they've had all these random guys. Tommy Canley they signed one year, and they kind of like in the bullpen, or excuse me, in October in the playoffs, they attack it like high leverage guys. Like they don't wait for the 9th inning. They'll bring a guy in the 6th and the 7th, and that's just how they've done it. Which I actually like that. That's a very analytical, new age, new style matchup is what I would call it. It's like a matchup thing. You don't really wait for the 8th or the 9th. Like I said, if the 7th inning rolls around and it's the opposing lineups, the meat of the order, and maybe there's a couple left-handers up in the order and you have Alex Vesia up, you're going right to Alex Vesia. It's just a very matchup-based thing. It's like you're trying to create the matchups, get the best advantage that you can. If you have 3 hitters coming up who crush left-handed pitching, you bring in a righty or someone who dominates. Like, that's what it is. It's all matchup-based. It's not like the old school, like, hey, the 8th inning is yours, the 9th inning is yours, go get him. We don't care who's up in the order. So that's a style that I actually do like, but I understand how, baseball is not always just played on a spreadsheet, and you can't always just map things out. And having a closer is obviously beneficial, because most teams have closers. And when you do have an actual closer, it actually does help, like, the rest of your bullpen. Like, Edwin Diaz will be the closer, so you will know, like, Alex Vesia, Tanner Scott, Blake Trinan, Edgardo Henriquez, like all these guys. Maybe they'll add some more guys. Jack Dreyer. I know I'm forgetting a couple guys, but like it makes those guys' jobs easier to know that like they're not the closer. Obviously, there will be times where Diaz will get rest. Maybe in October he'll come in and pitch a little bit sooner. I mean, another thing Edwin Diaz is not opposed to throughout his career is pitching like multiple innings. So I think that's something he'll definitely do come October time. So, you slot him in as the closer. Now you have, theoretically, Alex Vesia is like your setup man, but he's technically like your high leverage kind of guy that you can use in the 6th, 7th, 8th inning. I think, again, we'll get into this later in the offseason, but like a lot of people are expecting Tanner Scott to bounce back, Blake Trinan, Brusdar Graterol is supposed to come back at some point. And we'll see if they make any other moves. If they do, it'll definitely be, a 1-year kind of deal. Obviously they have Edgardo Henriquez, so all that kind of stuff, there's a trickle effect, a ripple effect, of signing Edwin Diaz. Not just that he's a great pitcher and that he becomes your closer, but it kind of makes the role of other pitchers a lot easier and just kind of, it's kind of like more simple of what you should expect. So, so that's pretty much all my thoughts on the Edwin Diaz signing. So now that we got that out of the way, the Edwin Diaz stuff, the last thing we'll talk about, a few things before we close up this pod. This won't take too long. But we're going to talk about some rumors and just a little bit of the noise that's out there. Some stuff that I was able to gather through Twitter and through a couple of just reports and just stuff that is out there on Twitter. So Obviously, since the winter meetings and since I last spoke to you guys, there has been a lot of things that have happened in Major League Baseball. Some of the big guys are still out there, like Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, but we saw Dylan Cease, former Padre, signed with the Blue Jays. Kyle Schwarber re-signed with the Phillies. There have been a couple other of little things. Yesterday, at the time of this recording, it's Sunday. Yesterday, Jorge Polanco, former Mariner, signed with the Mets. The Blue Jays have been signing guys just left and right. They're kind of doing like the Dodgers stuff of the previous two off seasons. They've signed Cody Ponce, the MVP over in the KBO. They obviously brought in Dylan Cease. They brought in Tyler Rogers yesterday, a relief pitcher. They're still rumored to be in on Tucker, Bo Bichette. So, there is a lot going on, and it looks like we still are in store for a lot of stuff and a lot of things to take place left in this, free agency offseason. So the number one rumor, again, I'm hesitant to see if it's like a real thing, but Tarek Skubal, believe it or not, there are real reports out there. For a little bit, it was, kind of just fake stuff. Wasn't really sure if Tarek Skubal was going to get traded this offseason. It's kind of, I don't want to say flipped, but there are a lot of reports out there now that it has gone from like kind of unlikely, a little bit less than 50% of a chance that, Skubal, when I say 50%, like less than 50% chance he gets traded, 50% chance he stays with the Tigers. It was like a better bet that he stays with the Tigers. It is actually looking more likely that he will be traded, and there are legit reports that the Dodgers are in on him. Now, again, if you were to ask me, do I think that would happen, I would say no, because I think that it would be a massive haul. And the biggest, question or just most interesting part of all that is, the Dodgers don't need Tarek Skubal. Their strong suit right now, the strongest part of their team, is their starting rotation. And Tarek Skubal is the best pitcher in the game. I mean, it's either him or Paul Skeens. I would actually say Paul Skeens, but that's more of a little bit of a projection. Skubal right now is slightly better than Skeens, but I also just think Skeens is so young and he's even Skubal I think is 29. Paul Skeens is 23 years old. He's still so young. He's already won a Cy Young. And I just think there's no doubt that Skeens going forward is going to be the best pitcher in the game. But if you're talking right now, they're 1A, 1B, and Skubal is probably right now a little bit better than Skeens. Obviously, he's won the last two Cy Youngs, and he'll be favored again to win his third. But he's obviously in a predicament with the Tigers. They're kind of like a mid-market team. They're definitely not a small market team, but they're definitely not a big market team. And they are one of these teams, like most teams in Major League Baseball, but they're very analytical, and they have not handed out a lot of big free agent contracts the last few years. I mean, the last time they really signed a big free agent, I guess, was Miguel Cabrera when they extended him. So most people believe that he will not end up with the Tigers, that they will not shell out the money that he'll demand. And he's obviously a free agent a year from now. So obviously, it would make a lot of sense for them to trade him if you're not going to re-sign him. But that's a tough thing to do because you got to thread the needle of, you're still trying to win, but if you trade Tarek Skubal, that is a huge, I get it. It's one of those positions where if you're a GM that you just who would want to be in that situation? I wouldn't want to be in that situation. If you trade Tarek Skubal, you obviously you piss off your entire fan base, but then I'm sure part of the team, it's a business and the players go out there and do their best to perform, but what does that send your team? What message does that send your team going into the season where you're trying to win? They've made the playoffs the last 2 years in a row. If you trade your best pitcher and the best pitcher in the game. But regardless of all that, the reports have been, increasing ever since the winter meetings. It has kind of become more realistic and more possible that they're going to trade him. And the Dodgers seem to be in on him. And I'll be honest, at first, that was probably the first time I really heard something with the Dodgers and was I don't know, it sounds a little much. Do we need Tarek Skubal? Now, again, if we got Tarek Skubal, I would be over the moon excited. I am not one of those people who I don't care about, the Dodgers spend a lot of money, people saying it's not fair. I don't care about any of that. Every organization out there can spend money. I understand baseball's not a cap sport, so obviously we have, big market teams, small market teams. That's a real thing. Obviously, the Tampa Bay Rays can't hand out $500 million to Tarek Skubal. But, teams can spend money. A lot of teams are just not as aggressive as the Dodgers. The Dodgers are just, the last few years, they've always been in this mode of trying to win, but really the last few years, ever since they signed Shohei, it's just been every year, all in. They don't wait for the market to play out. They don't wait for, players to fall into their laps, which is something they have done a lot in the past, and they still technically do. But they see a player that they want, and they go get him, like they did with Edwin Diaz, like they did with Blake Snell a year ago, like they did with a couple of those relievers, like they obviously did with Yamamoto and Shohei. And, so I wouldn't be like, this isn't fair if we get Skubal, but it is, technically if you speak out loud, Yamamoto, Skubal, Glasnow, Snell, Otani, like it does get a little bit much. Now, the reports have been that if a Skubal trade were to happen, Emmett Sheehan would definitely be in the deal. And there have even been reports that a Tyler Glasnow could be in the deal. So if technically something like that took place, where if the Tigers got back a young, controllable pitcher in Emmett Sheehan, and then they also were able to get Glasnow, to them that would be an ace, and someone that's a little bit more affordable for them. And then if you're the Dodgers, then you obviously now have a rotation that would consist of Skubal, Yamamoto, Shohei, Snell, and then Roki Sasaki. Again, it's still crazy elite, and you technically at that point you just upgraded from Emmett Sheehan and Tyler Glasnow to Tarek Skubal. But that would be a little bit different, where it wouldn't be like you're adding Tarek Skubal to the already best rotation in the game. They did have to give away in that scenario. Again, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to happen, but there are real reports, like legitimate reports, that he could end up getting traded, and the Dodgers are actually in on him, and it just shows the ultimate, they're just always trying to win, always trying to get better. So that's a lot of the Tarek Skubal stuff. So there are a couple other reports. They have been in talks with Cody Bellinger. Again, the most overwhelming reports are that the Mets and the Yankees are both really in on him. A couple of guys that are I think are legit and have a legit chance to happen. Harrison Bader, that's a guy I didn't mention in my previous podcast of players that match up with the Dodgers. Outfielder who's bounced around throughout his career, came up with the Cardinals, traded to the Yankees. He even got he even played for the Reds at the end of one year through the waiver wire. Then he played for the Mets, and then last year played for the Twins, got traded over to the Phillies. For the most part, has been a league average bat who plays elite defense, but he actually has had times throughout his career where he's hit really well, including last year where he almost had an 800 OPS bat. I think he hit 797 OPS. With elite defense, he could slot right into play center field for the Dodgers. Likely puts Teoscar in left, Pages in right. I think that's a legit option, but again, there are going to be teams in on him. The Phillies are going to want to bring him back. I could also see teams like the Blue Jays, the Giants, those kind of teams make a lot of sense for him. So there has been some noise with him. A couple of the players on the Cardinals, I do think that if the Dodgers are to pull off a pretty decent trade that's not Tarek Skubal, it would be with the Cardinals because of guys like Brendan Donovan and Lars Nootbaar, who I did mention as fits in my last podcast. Now, Donovan right now is being heavily rumored with the Giants and Mariners, but there were reports about the Dodgers being in on him, as well as Lars Nootbaar. Another guy that I didn't mention, I obviously did mention Abreu with the Red Sox, but it looks like he's probably more likely to stay with the Red Sox. The other guy that they could potentially trade is Jarren Duran, who is but mostly has played center field and left field throughout his career. Pretty good hitter. It's slightly above league average bat, hits right-handed pitching well. But he's kind of like a funky player. He's kind of like a talked about guy because he's like, kind of like a good looking guy that's like muscular, tattoos. Like he's kind of like a cool player that a lot of people like. He's fast. He shows a lot of emotion, but he's kind of like if you look at his numbers, it's very up and down. Like 2024, he had a really good year. I think he had an OPS in the 800s. I think he had the most extra base hits in baseball or the most triples. Could be confusing, one of the two. But he played center field a lot for the Red Sox that year. And he played like elite defense, stole a lot of bases. Last year in 2025, he did not hit the same, even though he did have a pretty decent year offensively. He's like a solid 770 OPS bat. But he will strike out. He will chase. But he played more left field with the Red Sox last year, not as much center field. Because they have Cedane Rafael, the center fielder, who's elite. So Duran played a lot of left field. And as a left fielder, which usually is an easier position than center field, he didn't play great defense. So that's a little weird. Like, I'd be a little nervous if the Dodgers acquired him. They would kind of view him as a left fielder instead of a center fielder, which would probably keep, Paez in center and Teoscar in right, which we don't want that. I said that. That has to be a priority to me for the Dodgers, is to not have Teoscar Hernandez play right field. But Duran is an interesting guy. I would be pretty excited for him. He's an electric guy. He actually has like Mexican roots in him. Someone in his family's from Mexico, so that's cool, given the Dodger ties. So that's another rumor. They appear to be out on Pete Fairbanks. It seems like teams like the Marlins and Diamondbacks have been rumored to be in on him. They don't really seem to be in on him, so he was my number one guy that I thought made sense for the Dodgers, but they don't really seem to be in on him. And then one of the last kind of rumors is Teoscar Hernandez. His name has come up a little bit in trade talks, which, again, is not surprising to me because I did mention that in my last podcast. Again, just like a lot of this other stuff, like Scooble or like Cody Bellinger stuff, like I don't think it'll happen. I don't think, Teoscar will be traded. But there are teams out there that need outfield help, and another one is like the Royals. This came up, the Royals have been in on Jarren Duran, a couple other guys. They actually just made a trade last night with the Brewers for Isaac Collins, so that kind of takes them out of that. But Teoscar, he's in an interesting position. I didn't get into this much in my last pod, but he obviously signed the deal that he did last year with the Dodgers. I think it was like 4 years, 100 and something million. I don't remember. But obviously he made the move over from left field to right field, where either way he's a horrible outfielder. But in right field, it really stood out as like, this guy is horrible, and he's like making the defense way worse. Where just for whatever reason, when he played left field the year before, there wasn't really that vibe. Now, he was still really bad, but it just never was like, you didn't really get that vibe of like, God, like, we can't have this guy out there. And then when you throw on top of that, like I said, he was playing right field. When you throw on top of that he didn't hit the same, he's actually a little bit of an older player that you might not realize. Like, Teoscar's like 33 years old at this point. It makes a lot of sense that the Dodgers could trade him, especially to a team that, like, they would view him as like a real upgrade. Like if you traded him to like a Marlins or team, Pirates, like those teams are rumored to try to like put together more offense. Even like the Red Sox, Tigers, like teams that have like DH spots available, corner outfield spots, they would view him as like an upgrade. And then the Dodgers would be able to like cut a little bit of payroll and a little bit of flexibility payroll wise and like on the roster. And it would kind of open up a couple of different things. So that's why I could see it as a possibility. But they've come out and said like they don't expect Teoscar to be traded, which doesn't mean anything. They could trade him tomorrow. I don't think he will end up being traded, but it is possible. Again, it just depends on like I could see a team like the Red Sox if they miss out on a couple. Like they missed out on Pete Alonso, who they were rumored in on. And, if they miss out on a couple other guys, like maybe an Alex Bregman, who they're rumored to be in on, Bo Bichette, like I could really see a team like that saying, let's go after, a Teoscar, make him our DH, and they could trade, they could make a Jarren Duran trade, like Teoscar Hernandez for Jarren Duran, a couple other guys to make the deal work. You get Teoscar Hernandez as your DH occasionally. He could play left field. but mostly he would be your DH. And then obviously Durant comes to the Dodgers. I could see a trade like that work out. But that's pretty much all my thoughts and all the rumors that are going around right now. It does look like the Dodgers will acquire some form of an impact bat. The last one, I guess, is the Kyle Tucker stuff. I said that I didn't think Tucker would end up with the Dodgers, but the biggest reason why it was a possibility is if his market, didn't play out like he thought it would. And that is still in the realm of possibilities, because right now the reports are that the only team who's really heavily pursues Kyle Tucker and is willing to give him a $400 million contract is the Blue Jays, which is where I think he's ultimately going to go, because maybe he would prefer some other places, because obviously to go and play for the Blue Jays, you have to go play in Canada, which is a big lifestyle change for a lot of guys if you're not from there. But if you're Kyle Tucker and you're going to get $400 million to go play for the best team in the American League, pretty much, I don't think that's a bad move. So I think he's going to end up playing there, because they seem to be the only team in on him, but he doesn't seem to have as big a market. And it is still possible if they could bring back Bo Bichette, and maybe that takes them out of the Kyle Tucker landing spot, whatever, sweepstakes, and his market comes down. It has been reported the Dodgers are not going to be in on him at the $400 million 10-year deal, but they are much more willing to go to that 4 or 5 year route. So it is still on the table. But I just think ultimately, Bellinger is going to return to the Yankees, or I guess go to the Mets. And then Tucker's going to end up with the Blue Jays. I just think that that's just how it's going to play out. But it's still in the realm of possibility. So, like I said, someone I'd be looking out for is one of those Cardinals guys. Lars Nootbaar, Brendan Donovan. Again, the reason why it might take a little while for something like this to play out is because the Dodgers, they've even come out and said, a lot of it does determine on where is Tommy Edman going to play in 2026. Because obviously if you have Tommy Edman penciled in to be your center fielder, then a guy like Brendan Donovan makes a lot of sense, because you could slot him in as your second baseman. But if you're not really sure where Tommy Edman's going to play, and it's kind of best to think of him as a second baseman, then maybe a Lars Nootbaar makes more sense. So we'll see how that plays out. I think of the guys that I mentioned, I think that Brendan Donovan, he'd be last of these three guys, but I think Harrison Bader and Lars Nootbaar are two guys to look out for as two guys that the Dodgers could bring in. I would really like both of those guys. Nootbaar would be a little bit of a change of scenery guy, try to tap into a few things. He's got some really nice metrics the Dodgers would like his plate discipline and his power. And then Harrison Bader would be a nice security blanket that, if he doesn't hit like he has at times throughout his career, at the very least you're going to get an elite defender in center field who's going to help out the team in that aspect. And maybe they can tap into some stuff with his bat, and it's not going to be an expensive contract. And then Lars Nootbaar shouldn't really cost that much to get him. So those are my thoughts on all the rumors. Tarek Skubal, what do you guys think? Comment below. Leave a comment. Like I said, tweet. You can tweet at me on X at TalkingBlueNick. And leave a comment below. Who do you want the Dodgers to get? Who do you think is more likely? You can leave both if you like. Leave a comment as to what do you think is more likely? What do you think you would actually want to happen? Do you not want Tarek Skubal? Do you think that's a little too much? Would you be hyped for it? I would assume most of you guys would be hyped for it because he is the best pitcher in the game. Is there someone else I left out? I didn't really talk much about Steven Kwan. Maybe he's a possibility. So leave a comment. What do you guys think? I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Edwin Diaz is your newest Dodger. Next time some news breaks, I'll hop on here. Because I was in Orlando at the winter meetings, I wasn't really able to do this pod right away. But that's the glory of the offseason, is that Edwin Diaz, even 4 or 5 days after it happened, is still the most exciting news to talk about with the Dodgers. So, as always, thank you guys so much for listening to Talking Blue, episode 77. You can get this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can follow us on all social media at Talking Blue Pod. You can follow myself at Talking Blue Nick on X. And then, like I said, on Reddit as well at competitive-media715. Thank you guys so much for listening. I will hop on here the next time some news breaks. If not, we'll just get on here and talk about some rumors, talk about some whatever. Christmas stuff is coming up. Hopefully the Dodgers can give us one more nice present, one more acquisition before Christmas, and I'll get on here and I'll break it down for you guys. So thank you guys so much for listening. We will see you guys very shortly. Enjoy the holiday season.